It was Christmas Eve, and Ifeoma sat by the window, her gaze lost in the twinkling Christmas lights outside. The sight of the decoration, so festive and alive, seemed to mock her inner turmoil. A strange heaviness had settled in her heart, something she had been carrying for years but never truly acknowledged until now. It had become too much to bear, especially with the holidays upon them. Her marriage to Uzochukwu had always been a source of pride for her. He was the strong man she had married, a provider, a protector, and the love of her life. They had built a life together, surrounded by family, love, and laughter. But over the last few months, something had changed. Their relationship, once vibrant and full of joy, had begun to feel strained, like a beautiful song losing its melody. Uzochukwu, whom she had once known to be full of life and energy, had started to change. There were the subtle signs: his fatigue, his irritability, the way he no longer seemed to laugh as easily as before. But it wasn't until that evening that Ifeoma truly realized how deep the changes ran. That night, Uzochukwu had begun complaining of dizziness. He said that he couldn't see properly, that everything around him was blurring. At first, Ifeoma thought it was just fatigue, something that could be fixed with a good night's sleep. But as the hours passed, the situation grew more alarming. His complaints became more frequent, and soon he was unable to see at all. Uzo, Ifeoma's voice was trembling as she called out to him, her concern turning to fear. "What's happening? Can you see me?" "Ifeoma," his voice sounded strained, almost desperate. "I can't see. Everything is dark. It's like there's a fog around me. I can't see you anymore." Terror gripped her heart. This wasn't just a headache or fatigue. Something was seriously wrong. "Uzo, we need to get to the doctor. We need to figure this out now." In a panic, Ifeoma helped him to the car, her hands shaking as she held him steady. She tried to comfort him, but inside she was screaming, "Don't worry, it's going to be okay. We'll get you help." At the clinic, Dr. Chaik, a well-respected doctor in their neighborhood, greeted them warmly, but immediately noticed the distress in Ifeoma's eyes. She had always been strong, but today something was different. "Usochukwu," Dr. Chike began, his tone serious. "What you're experiencing sounds like amaurosis fugax, temporary blindness caused by a disruption in the blood flow to the eyes. This could be due to a clot or inflammation in the blood vessels around the eyes." Ifeoma felt the air leave her lungs. Temporary blindness? It sounded like something out of a nightmare. What does that mean? Is it permanent? Will he ever see again? Dr. Chai gave them the hard truth. The good news is that it's treatable. With medication, we can help restore the blood flow and, hopefully, his vision. However, if that doesn't work, we may need to consider further treatment, possibly surgery. Surgery? Ifeoma's mind raced. How could this be happening? Of all times, why now? It was Christmas, supposed to be a time for joy, togetherness, and celebration. Instead, she was sitting in a sterile doctor's office, listening to the worst news she could imagine. The weight of it pressed down on her chest, threatening to crush her. "We will start him on blood thinners to reduce the possibility of blood clots," Dr. Chaik continued. "If after 2 weeks he doesn't show improvement, we may need to intervene surgically. But for now, we're hopeful." Hopeful. The word hung in the air like a fragile thread. Ifeoma had never felt so uncertain. What did hope even mean in this context? Would her husband ever see again? Would they ever be able to live the life they had dreamed of together? With the prescription in hand, they made their way home. The drive was silent, each lost in their thoughts. Ifeoma kept glancing at Uzochukwu, still trying to come to terms with the reality that a strong, vibrant husband was now relying on her in ways he never had before. Back home, Ifeoma helped Uzochukwu settle onto the couch. She could see the frustration in his eyes, the helplessness that mirrored her own. He was a man who had always taken care of her, who had been her protector, her pillar. Now, she was the one who had to hold him up. Don't worry, Uzo, she reassured him once more. This is just temporary. You'll be fine. We'll get through this together. But in her heart, Ifeoma knew that something inside her had already begun to shift. She loved Uzochukwu, but she couldn't help but feel the weight of her own desires, her own needs, creeping into her thoughts. It was strange. She had always been content in her marriage, but now something was missing. The spark between them had dimmed, and she didn't know how to get it back. As the days passed, Ifeoma did everything she could to take care of Uzochukwu. She helped him with simple tasks, feeding him, guiding him to the bathroom, making sure he took his medication. But it was exhausting, physically and emotionally. She began to feel more like a caregiver than a wife, and as the days turned into weeks, she found herself questioning everything. What had happened to the passion, the love that had once burned so brightly between them? Where had the man she had fallen in love with gone? There were nights when she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. She tried to push the thoughts aside, to focus on helping Uzochukwu, but there were times when she couldn't help but feel suffocated by the weight of it all. Then there was Chinedu, a man from her past. He had always been there, in the background of her life. They had been friends since childhood, and as time went on, their bond had only grown stronger. It wasn't romantic at first. They had shared laughs, memories, and conversations that had always made Ifeoma feel heard and understood. But now, Chinedu seemed to be the one person who could make her feel alive again. Their late night phone calls, their inside jokes, the way he listened to her in a way that Uzochukwu hadn't in months. It felt like a lifeline. And if she were honest with herself, she was starting to crave more than just friendship. The days after Uzochukwu's diagnosis were long and tense. Ifeoma tried to remain strong, doing everything in her power to care for him. But the cracks in their marriage were starting to show. It wasn't just the physical strain of caring for him, it was the emotional weight that came with it. She had always prided herself on being a loving and devoted wife, but the role of caretaker was different. It was draining. There were no romantic gestures, no shared moments of laughter, just endless chores and hospital visits. Uzochukwu, for his part, was doing his best to remain positive, but he couldn't hide the frustration in his eyes. He had always been the one to take care of Ifeoma, the one who made decisions and held the family together. Now he was the one who needed help. He couldn't drive anymore, couldn't go out by himself, and worst of all, he couldn't see. The man who had once been so strong was now dependent on her. And though she didn't want to admit it, Ifeoma felt resentment creeping in. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Ifeoma could feel the tension between them. The silence was deafening, and the once warm, intimate conversations had been replaced with awkward pauses. It was as if they were two strangers sharing a space, neither knowing how to bridge the gap that had grown between them. Ifeoma, Uzochukwu spoke quietly, his voice breaking the silence. Do you think I'll ever be the same again? Do you think I'll ever see again? His words were filled with a desperation that Ifyoma hadn't heard from him in years. It tore at her heart. Of course you will, she said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. The doctor said the blood thinners will help. Just give it time. I'm not sure how much more time I can wait, he replied, his voice thick with frustration. I feel useless, Ifyoma. I can't even take care of myself. And you're here taking care of everything, and I'm just a burden. Ifyoma didn't know how to respond. She had never seen him like this. Uzochukwu had always been the one who looked after her, who made her feel safe. Now it was her turn to do the same for him. But it was so different. She loved him, but part of her longed for the man he used to be, the man who didn't need her in this way. I'm not a burden, he continued, his voice small, but I can't help but feel like I've failed you, failed us. Ifyoma placed a hand on his, trying to offer comfort. You haven't failed anyone, Uzo. You're going through something difficult, but we're in this together. But even as she said the words, she knew they weren't entirely true. Something had shifted in her, something that she couldn't quite put into words. She wasn't sure she could continue living in this strange limbo, stuck between the past and the present. The love they once shared felt distant, fading in the face of so many changes. The thought of leaving crossed her mind more than once, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. She had promised to stand by Uzuchukwu, to support him in sickness and in health. But the weight of caring for him, of being the only one he could rely on, was beginning to feel suffocating. She loved him, but she wasn't sure how much longer she could pretend everything was fine. Days turned into weeks, and there was little improvement in Uzochukwu's condition. Ifeoma kept up the routine, feeding him, helping him with basic tasks, and keeping him company, but it was all becoming a blur. Her own needs were starting to slip further and further down the list, and though she didn't want to admit it, she could feel the pull of other distractions. Chinedu had been there for her in ways Uzochukwu no longer could. He was a comforting presence in her life, someone who made her feel seen, heard, and understood. She found herself reaching out to him more often, their conversations lasting late into the night. And while nothing physical had happened between them yet, she couldn't deny the spark that still existed. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, Ifeoma found herself talking to Chinedu on the phone again. Her voice was quiet, and she was careful not to let Uzochukwu hear her. I'm so tired, Chinedu. I feel like I'm drowning. I try to be strong for Uzo, but I can't keep pretending that everything is okay. It's like we're just existing together, not living. Ifeoma. Chinedu's voice was gentle but firm. You're not alone in this. You've been so strong for so long, but it's okay to feel this way. It's okay to not have all the answers, but you need to think about what you need too. You can't keep sacrificing yourself and expect to stay whole. His words hit her like a thunderbolt. She hadn't allowed herself to think about what she needed. She had been so focused on Uzochukwu's needs, on keeping up the facade of everything being fine, that she had neglected her own desires, her own happiness. I don't know what to do anymore, Ifeoma confessed, her voice breaking. I don't want to leave him, but I don't know how to keep living like this. I feel trapped. Chinedu? There was a long pause before he spoke again. You don't have to make any decisions right now. Just breathe. Take things one step at a time. But Ifeoma knew deep down that it wasn't that simple. The truth was, she didn't know how much longer she could stay in this relationship, not when she felt so alone, so disconnected. That night, she went to bed beside Uzochukwu, but sleep didn't come easy. Her mind raced, torn between duty and desire, between the man she had promised to love and the man who had begun to feel the emptiness in her heart. She had never felt so torn, so conflicted. As the days wore on, the tension between Ifeoma and Uzochukwu grew. I- Uzochukwu's condition was slow to improve, and Ifeoma's patience was starting to wear thin. She was becoming more withdrawn, spending long hours alone, either lost in her thoughts or talking to Chinedu. The more she spoke to him, the more she realized how much she longed for the kind of affection and attention he gave her, something that was increasingly absent from her marriage. But every time she looked at Uzochukwu, she was reminded of the vows they had made, the promises they had shared. He was still her husband, the man she had chosen to build a life with. Yet, as the distance between them grew, Ifeoma couldn't shake the feeling that their marriage was no longer the same. Ifeoma sat on the couch, her gaze fixed on Uzochukwu, who was trying, though with much difficulty, to navigate the house without his sight. His movements were slow, cautious, as though every step carried the weight of an immense burden. It broke Ifeoma's heart to see him like this. But as the days went on, her sympathy was starting to shift into something else, a quiet frustration, a longing for the man he once was. She had been by his side through thick and thin, but now this disease, this condition, was more than just a medical challenge. It was a test of their love. She watched as he fumbled with the remote control, his face etched with frustration. He was trying to keep up the pretense that everything was okay, but the strain was visible in his features. It was hard to keep pretending that things would go back to the way they were. She had been waiting for something to change, but nothing was different. For the first time in a long while, Ifeoma found herself questioning her role in all of this. She was so consumed with taking care of Uzochukwu that she had neglected herself. She was tired, physically and emotionally drained. The days were starting to blend together, each one feeling like the last. She had been doing everything to keep their world intact, but she was beginning to wonder if their world was too fragile to hold together any longer. Ifeoma, Usochukwu's voice broke into her thoughts. Can you help me with the remote? I can't figure this thing out. She turned to him, forcing a smile onto her face. Of course, Yuzo, she said, her voice gentle. Here, let me help. As she took the remote from his hands, she noticed how he was clinging to her, his need for her growing by the day. It made her feel wanted, but in a way that was suffocating. She wasn't just his wife anymore. She was his caretaker, his crutch, his lifeline. The emotional weight of it all was starting to take a toll on her. Once she handed him the remote, their eyes met briefly. For a split second, she saw the man she had married, the man who had once been so confident, so self-assured. But that man was slipping away, and in his place was a shadow of his former self. Ifeoma had always admired Uzochukwu's strength, but now that strength was being replaced by fragility. The guilt that washed over her was suffocating. How could she feel frustrated with him? He didn't ask for this. This wasn't his fault. He hadn't chosen to go blind. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life had been hijacked by his illness. She felt trapped, stuck between being a devoted wife and wanting to regain some sense of her own identity. Later that evening, after she had made dinner for the two of them, Ifeoma sat at the table, watching Uzochukwu eat. The silence between them had become more pronounced. It wasn't just the absence of words, it was the absence of connection. They used to talk for hours, laugh about silly things, share their hopes and dreams. But now the words came less and less. And when they did, it was only about the practicalities of life, what needed to be done, where things were, and what had to be taken care of. The love they had once shared seemed to be fading in the face of illness, routine, and the unspoken tension between them. Ifeoma, I know this isn't easy for you, Uzochukwu said suddenly, his voice low and uncertain. I see how much you've been doing. You're amazing. You've been by my side through all of this, and I don't know what I would do without you. His words should have comforted her, but instead, they made her feel even more guilty. He was thanking her for being there, but she didn't feel like she was doing enough. She didn't feel like herself anymore. She had become someone she didn't recognize, someone who was giving so much of herself to take care of him that she had lost sight of her own needs. It's okay, Uzo, she said, forcing the words out. I'm doing what I need to do. We'll get through this. But as she spoke, she couldn't help but feel the growing distance between them. She was doing everything for him, but he couldn't even see her anymore. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had spent years taking care of him, loving him with everything she had, but now she was beginning to feel invisible. Later that night, after Uzochukwu had gone to bed, Ifeoma found herself staring at the ceiling. Her thoughts were racing. The guilt, the frustration, the longing for something more. It was all too much. She missed the old days, the carefree times when everything had been easier. She missed feeling alive, feeling desired, feeling like she had a future that was full of possibilities. But now all she had was a future full of uncertainty, and she didn't know if she could keep going down this path. And then there was Chinedu. Her thoughts drifted to him. Chinedu had always been there, a friend, a confidant, someone she could talk to without judgment. But recently, their conversations had taken on a new tone. They spoke of their past, their memories, and more recently, their feelings. It was clear that Chinedu cared for her. But what troubled Ifeoma was that she found herself caring for him too. She hadn't meant for it to happen. It had started innocently enough. Late night calls, checking in on each other, sharing old jokes. But the more she spoke to him, the more she realized how much he made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Seen. The connection between them had deepened, and though nothing had happened physically, she could feel the pull between them. She had told herself that it was harmless, that it was just a bit of comfort in the middle of the chaos. But deep down, she knew it wasn't that simple. She was starting to depend on him in ways that she should have been depending on Uzochukwu. Chinedu had become the escape she hadn't known she needed, the distraction from the reality she was living in. He made her feel desired, made her feel important. With Uzochukwu, she had become invisible, a caretaker without a sense of self. With Chinedu, she felt like the woman she used to be, the woman who was full of life, full of passion. One night, after another particularly difficult evening with Uzochukwu, Ifeoma sat by the phone, staring at Chinedu's name on the screen. She had just finished helping Uzochukwu to bed, and she was exhausted, physically, mentally, and emotionally. But Chinedu's message popped up on her screen. A simple question. How are you? Ifeoma hesitated before replying. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she thought about the words she wanted to send. She had always been honest with Chinedu, but lately it felt like there was more at stake. The truth was she wasn't okay. She hadn't been okay for a while. I'm struggling, Chinedu, she typed, her fingers trembling as she wrote. Everything is so heavy. I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending like I'm fine. She hit send before she could second guess herself. Within moments, his reply came through. Ifeoma, you don't have to pretend with me. You're allowed to feel however you feel. You're allowed to be tired, to be frustrated, but you don't have to carry it all alone. She read his message over and over, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. She wasn't alone. She wasn't invisible to him. But the moment that brought comfort also brought guilt. She was reaching out to Chinedu in ways she should have been reaching out to Uzochukwu. She had been so focused on taking care of Uzochukwu that she had forgotten about herself, forgotten that she was allowed to feel too. And now, as she read Chinedu's words, she couldn't ignore the growing realization that something had shifted in her heart. She didn't know where this would lead, but she knew one thing for sure. Her world was about to change in ways she hadn't anticipated. Days turned into weeks, and Usochukwu's condition remained a constant shadow over their lives. Though his sight had not yet fully returned, there were small improvements, a glimmer of hope that things might get better. But with each passing day, the weight of Ifeoma's responsibilities grew heavier. She found herself stretched thin, balancing between being a wife, a caregiver, and a woman who longed for a life outside of the burden she was carrying. In the quiet moments, Ifeoma would look at Uzochukwu and wonder if he still saw her as the woman he had married, or if she had become nothing more than the nurse in his life, the one who fed him, bathed him, and took care of him when all he could do was wait for his sight to return. The love they once shared seemed to have slipped away, replaced by something more like duty than desire. Uzochukwu, for his part, was trying to be strong. He kept telling Ifeoma that everything would be okay, that he would get better, and that he was grateful for all that she was doing for him. But Ifeoma could hear the cracks in his voice, the subtle desperation in his words. He was no longer the strong man who had once taken care of her. And now it was she who was shouldering the weight of their relationship, and the exhaustion was starting to show. One night, as she was helping him into bed, Uzochukwu turned to her with a pained expression. Ifeoma, he said, his voice heavy with emotion. I feel like I'm losing you. Ifeoma froze, her heart skipping a beat. She had been so consumed by her own struggles that she hadn't stopped to consider what Uzochukwu was going through. She had been trying so hard to keep everything together, to hold on to the family they had built, but in the process, she had neglected him, emotionally at least. She realized for the first time that Uzochukwu's isolation went beyond his blindness. He was feeling abandoned in a way that she hadn't recognized until now. She sat beside him on the bed, her hand resting gently on his. Uzo, I'm here, she said softly. I'm not going anywhere, but I can't do this alone. I need you too. He looked at her, his eyes full of sorrow. I feel like I've become a burden to you. You've given so much of yourself, and I can't give you anything back. I don't want to be like this anymore, Ifeoma. I don't want to be the man who needs help all the time. His words hit her harder than she had expected. In that moment, she realized just how deep his shame and frustration ran. He was still the man she had fallen in love with, but now he was caught in a situation he couldn't control. and it was slowly eroding his sense of self-worth. I'm not here because I have to be, Uzo, Ifeoma said, her voice trembling. I'm here because I love you. But we need to talk. We need to figure this out. I can't keep pretending that everything is fine. Uzochukwu nodded, the sadness in his eyes intensifying. I know, Ifeoma. I can feel it too. There's a distance between us that wasn't there before. I don't know how to fix it. Ifeoma stood up and walked to the window, her thoughts swirling in her mind. She had been holding everything in, trying to keep up the facade of the perfect wife. She had been so focused on Uzochukwu's needs that she hadn't taken a moment to look inward, to ask herself what she needed. But now, standing in front of the window, she could no longer ignore the fact that she was lost. I'm not sure I know how to fix it either, she said quietly, almost to herself. I've been so focused on taking care of you, Uzo, that I forgot about myself. I forgot what it means to feel alive, to feel loved. The silence in the room was deafening. Uzochukwu's voice broke through it, softer this time. I never wanted you to lose yourself in all of this. I've been so focused on my own struggles that I didn't realize what was happening to us, to you. Ifeoma turned back to him, her heart aching. I love you, Uzo, but this is hard. I can't keep pretending that everything is okay when it's not. I'm not the woman I used to be. I don't know who I am anymore. Uzochukwu's expression softened, and he reached out to her. I'm sorry, Ifeoma. I never meant to make you feel like this. I never wanted to be a burden. As he spoke, Ifeoma realized that he wasn't the only one to blame for the distance between them. She had let herself drift away too. She had let her own needs fade into the background while trying to keep everything together. The truth was, she hadn't just been losing him. She had been losing herself too. That night, they sat together in silence, neither one of them knowing where to go from there. The road ahead seemed uncertain, full of questions neither of them had the answers to. But in that moment, Ifeoma knew one thing for sure. Something had to change. She couldn't keep living like this, caught in a life that no longer felt like her own. The next day, as Ifeoma sat in the living room, the weight of the previous night's conversation pressing heavily on her, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Chinedu. It was simple, but it hit her like a wave. Ifeoma, I'm here for you, always. Let me know when you're ready to talk. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't heard from Chinedu in days, not since their last conversation, and the fact that he had reached out to her again brought a mix of relief and guilt. She had been leaning on him for emotional support in a way that felt both comforting and dangerous. Part of her wanted to reach out to him, to talk about everything she was feeling, her frustrations, her desires, her confusion. But another part of her reminded her that she had made a vow to Usochukwu, that she had promised to stay by his side no matter what. Yet every time she thought about Usochukwu, she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that their marriage was slipping away. The connection they once had was fraying, and there was no easy way to repair it. Chinedu had become her escape, the person who made her feel like she was still alive, like she still mattered. But Usochukwu needed her, too. He was struggling, trying to hold on to whatever remained of their marriage, and she couldn't keep running away from him. As the days went by, Ifeoma found herself trapped in an emotional tug of war between her love for Uzochukwu and her growing feelings for Chinedu. The strain was becoming unbearable, and she knew that a decision would soon need to be made. but she wasn't sure she was ready to face the consequences of whatever choice she made. The air in the house felt thick with unspoken words. The tension between Ifeoma and Uzochukwu was palpable. She could no longer ignore the growing distance between them. The weight of their situation was starting to suffocate her. She loved him, but love alone couldn't mend the cracks that had formed in their marriage. They were both holding on to a version of their relationship that no longer existed, clinging to the hope that things would return to what they had once been. But the truth was, nothing would ever be the same again. Ifeoma had tried so hard to be the perfect wife, the perfect caretaker, but the effort had drained her. She had given everything to Uzochukwu, and yet, the more she gave, the more she felt like she was losing herself. She had become a shadow of the woman she once was, empty, tired, and disconnected. And while Uzochukwu was struggling with his own emotions and frustrations, Ifeoma was grappling with something else entirely. The realization that she might not be able to keep going much longer. Every day felt like a reminder of how much had changed between them. Their once vibrant conversation had turned into forced exchanges. The moments of intimacy, of tenderness, were few and far between. Ifeoma had tried to hold on to the hope that things would get better, that one day Uzochukwu would regain his sight and everything would return to normal. But the more time passed, the more she wondered if normal was even possible anymore. It wasn't just the physical toll that Uzochukwu's blindness was taking on their relationship. It was the emotional strain as well. Ifeoma found herself feeling more and more resentful of the life she had been thrust into. She had spent years taking care of Uzochukwu, but now she was starting to wonder if she had forgotten how to take care of herself. As the holidays came to an end, Ifeoma felt a heavy weight on her chest. It was as if the world around her had stopped moving, and she was stuck in a moment that she couldn't escape. She was exhausted, physically, mentally, emotionally, and she didn't know how much longer she could keep pretending everything was fine. One evening, as she sat alone in the living room, her phone buzzed again. It was another message from Chinedu. He had been reaching out to her more and more lately, offering words of comfort and understanding. His messages had become her lifeline, a reminder that there was still someone who saw her for who she truly was, not just as a caretaker or a wife. Ifeoma, I can't stop thinking about you. I'm here for you whenever you're ready to talk. Her heart skipped a beat. She had been avoiding him for the past few days, unsure of what to say or how to explain the mess she was in. But now, as she read his message, she felt the weight of everything she had been carrying come crashing down on her. She stood up, pacing the room, her mind racing. She couldn't deny that her connection with Chinedu had grown stronger, that he made her feel things she hadn't felt in a long time. But Uzochukwu needed her too. He was still her husband, the man she had promised to love and cherish. How could she betray him like this? She stared at the phone, torn between the life she had with Uzochukwu and the life she was beginning to imagine with Chinedu. She had always been the loyal wife, the one who put everyone else's needs before her own. But now she was facing a choice that would change everything. In that moment, Ifeoma realized that she could no longer live in the shadows of her own life. She couldn't keep hiding from the truth, pretending that everything was okay when it wasn't. She needed to confront the reality of her situation, no matter how painful it might be. The next morning, Ifeoma woke up early. She knew that today would be the day when everything would come to a head. She couldn't keep living like this. She had to make a decision, even if it meant tearing her world apart. As she prepared breakfast for Uzochukwu, her mind kept drifting back to the conversation they had had the night before. His words echoed in her mind. I feel like I'm losing you. And she had responded with the words she thought would comfort him. But deep down, she knew it wasn't enough. She had been holding back from him, from both him and herself. When Uzochukwu entered the kitchen, he could sense the change in the air. Ifeoma was quieter than usual, her movements slower, more deliberate. He didn't say anything at first, but he couldn't ignore the tension that had settled between them. Ifeoma, Uzochukwu said, his voice filled with uncertainty. I know things have been tough. I know I've been difficult to deal with. But I need you to know that I appreciate everything you've done for me. You've been my rock. Ifeoma looked up at him, her heart heavy with emotion. Uzochukwu, she began, her voice shaky. I love you, but I don't know if I can keep doing this. I don't know if I can keep pretending that everything is fine when it's not. I've been so focused on taking care of you, on being there for you, that I've forgotten about myself. Uzochukwu's expression shifted, his brow furrowing as he took a step closer to her. What are you saying, Ifeoma? You're scaring me. She took a deep breath, gathering the courage to say what she had been holding inside for so long. I'm saying that I don't know how much longer I can keep living this way. I'm not happy, Uzo. I don't feel like myself anymore. I don't know what I need, but I know that I can't keep sacrificing everything for you. The silence that followed was deafening. Uzochukwu stood there, his face a mixture of shock and confusion. He didn't know what to say. He had never imagined that Ifeoma would feel this way. He had always thought that she was the strong one, the one who could handle everything. But now, as he looked at her, he saw something he hadn't noticed before. She was broken too. I'm sorry, Uzo, Ifeoma whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. I don't want to hurt you, but I've been holding on to something that isn't there anymore. Uzochukwu stood in stunned silence, the weight of her words sinking in. He didn't know what to say, but deep down, he knew that things had changed. He had been so focused on his own struggles that he hadn't seen what was happening to Ifeoma. He hadn't seen the cracks forming in their relationship, the distance that had grown between them. I love you, Ifeoma, Uzochukwu said finally, his voice soft. But if you're not happy, if you feel like you've lost yourself, I can't ask you to stay. You deserve more than this. Ifeoma's heart shattered at his words. She had been so afraid of hurting him, of breaking their marriage, but now she realized that staying in a relationship that no longer worked for either of them was far more painful than facing the truth. As the weight of their conversation settled between them, Ifeoma knew that her life was about to change. She didn't know where it would lead or what would happen to her marriage, but she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't keep living in the shadows anymore. She had to let go, not just of Uzochukwu, but of the life she had clung to for so long. And as she walked away from that moment, she realized that sometimes letting go is the only way to find yourself again.